Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. Today, I want to talk about dating with anxiety. Now, I want to acknowledge first and foremost that anyone and everyone is going to have a little bit of anxiety come up for them when they first start to date somebody. You know, that could be described as butterflies in your stomach, a little bit of nervousness when you're driving to the date, and that's perfectly normal. What we want to pay attention to is what's deeper, what's below that feeling of butterflies and excitement, because that can be a good part of the dating experience. What we want to dig deeper into is when anxiety shows up for us. Oh, do I regret setting this date? Do I want to back out at the last minute? Am I unsure if I'm even ready to date? These are things and ways that we can check in with ourselves on whether or not we're experiencing anxiety when dating. So first and foremost, we got to dig into a little self-awareness. What is actually coming up for me today? Is it excitement? Is it nervousness? Or is it anxiety? A little bit of a backstory for me. I first experienced depression when I was 19, and how that showed up in my life was actually impacting my work life, impacting my friendships, impacting my physical appearance, and eventually leading to dropping out of college for a semester or two, taking a break, redirecting my life, finding a new story, transferring schools, etc. That's how depression showed up in my life for the first time. And over the next 3 or 4 years, I chose to suppress that emotion with a tendency to lean on alcohol, a tendency to lean on poor nutrition, over exercise. All of these things showed up for me in my initial battle with depression. So for the next 15, 16, 20 years, I held on to the story that I was experiencing depression on a daily basis. Eventually, when my business started to turn south, I became distracted from my priorities and my mission in life. Anxiety began to show up. And ways that showed up for me was, like I said earlier, that hesitation to actually meet up for the first date, or the regret of actually setting the first date because internally I knew that I needed to take a break, but I wasn't listening to that internal compass. A few years later down the road, speaking with my current counselor, and he did an intake assessment on depression and anxiety. Quick little 10-question, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you feel when this experience shows up in your life? And what we came to understand is that generalized anxiety disorder was a more appropriate label for this time in my life. So if you're like me, you probably have feelings of the highs and the lows of which depression and anxiety can show up for you. My recommendation is it's best to speak to somebody professional. You know, I really do enjoy speaking to my dialectic behavior therapist and licensed marriage and family therapist. That's what he specializes in, so that I can have an objective observer on my life who can reflect back to me what's showing up for me. We get the opportunity to have deep, mostly one-sided discussions in a safe container where I can let emotions flow and really process a lot of things that come up for me, especially within the last 6 weeks. So if you haven't been following along, I've been sharing a little bit into my breakup story from my relationship that was about 10 or 11 months long. And if you stick around to the end of this episode, I'll dig a little bit deeper into that story. A few days ago, I put it out there on Instagram. Hey, do you guys have any questions for me as I bring up the topic of dating with anxiety? And one of our longtime small group clients submitted a question that I want to actually address based on the key component of self-awareness and how anxiety shows up when we're dating. She asks, how do we date with anxiety without wearing a mask or a facade? And this question is an amazing question. I want to honor it first before I answer it. What I want to recommend is that we label and name it. There's a great quote from Brené Brown. Shame cannot survive being spoken, and it cannot survive empathy. So what I mean by that is labeling and naming it removes all shame from the fact that we have anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, bipolar, any other ways that anxiety shows up in our lives. By labeling it and naming it, we begin to process and accept and face what we struggle. And by labeling it and naming it with somebody that we're dating is is allowing them the opportunity to meet you with empathy. When you have the courage to label and name it with somebody that you're dating, you find yourself no longer going about it alone. I can imagine in the future when I get back out there, begin dating again after my period of healing that I'm going through now, I'll have a better approach to labeling and naming what's coming up for me. Hey, I had a little bit of nervousness before showing up on this date. Hey, I had some butterflies in my stomach before I showed up on that date. But it might also give me an opportunity to include my date into my inner world, into my inner experience. Hey, not sure about you, but I definitely had some butterflies on my drive over here. If you can identify that they're butterflies and not anxiety or regret or apprehension, then we're in a good place, and we can understand that anxiety isn't showing up and taking over our dating experience. If you've been following along on the podcast for a while, you know that one of my favorite things to talk about is attachment theory. Let's briefly discuss how a securely attached person experiences dating. They will have those butterflies in their stomach. They will have a little bit of nervous and anticipation for a first date, second date, and those feelings won't become like anxiety if you're experiencing that yourself. A securely attached person can recognize red flags even before the first date or on the first date. And from an essentialist point of view, they can go out on quite a few dates, meet quite a few people, pick the person that's best fit for them based on what those butterflies are telling them, what their inner compass is telling them, and by process of elimination, they tend to find another securely attached person to partner up with, and they exit the dating pool a lot faster than the other two attachment styles. Let's discuss the anxiously attached person just for a moment. They tend to overthink and ruminate and make excuses for other people's behavior, which can lead to a lot more anxiety when dating. It's almost like a spiral. It can go upward or it can go downward. And the overthinking and the ruminating and making excuses for other people's behavior can drive that anxiety into a downward spiral, causing a whole lot of self-criticism, a whole lot of self-abandonment, and self-sabotage. So if you find yourself in this position of like, oh, well, they didn't text me back because they're busy at work or they have family in town. When you find yourself making excuses and making up stories for another person's behavior, that's something to take a look at and to dig a little bit deeper into how anxiety is showing up for you when dating. For the avoidantly attached person, anxiety can show up. It just shows up in a little bit different way. When feelings of intimacy and closeness arise, the avoidantly attached person will actually anxiously avoid that connection by experiencing some deactivating strategies. Deactivating strategies in this particular case that are anxiety driven are like, oh, I'm better off alone. Here are the reasons why it's better to be single. And they may actually have this inner monologue of like, why do I always find people that come on so strong? Which creates a lot of anxiety in the avoidantly attached person. They may not experience it in the same way as a traditional version of anxiety. When we get down to the core of it, that's essentially what's happening. They are anxious about the feelings of intimacy that are arising for them, and so they want to run away. That's all well and good to have self-awareness and to label and name when anxiety is coming up for us. It's also very beneficial to have support along the way. In between meetings for my men's group, in between every other week counseling sessions, I need to become more self-led when it comes to anxiety when dating in the modern era. Text messages and apps and social media make us more accessible now than ever before if we don't have personalized boundaries around it. So what I've found has helped me work through feelings of anxiety when it comes to dating in my life or just in general, because as I mentioned before, it's generalized anxiety disorder. It's not just like hyper-focused on my love life and relationships and dating. Anxiety shows up for me in my professional life, in my parenting, in my relationships with family and friends, etc. When it comes to self-leadership and facing my life when anxiety shows up for me, I tend to focus on the choices that I make. How can I adjust my own choices so that I don't experience undue or unnecessary anxiety in my life? We're all going to have hard times. I would say that this season in my life has been one of the hardest over the past few years, and I've been facing it over and over and over again, becoming much more resilient than I ever thought possible. But resiliency is not the overall solution to facing anxiety when dating or out in our day-to-day lives. What I need to take a look at is the choices that bring me closer to feelings of anxiety. So I'm going to start small with my choices. Having gone through a recent breakup, 6 or 7, almost 8 weeks ago now, I've needed to face the urge to get back on the apps and cover up the feelings that I'm experiencing with instant gratification of a new date, a new partner, or a new experience, or new butterflies, or new anticipation, or new anxiety. It's quite possible that my central nervous system is gravitating to an experience that would keep me at an anxious level. So I need to delay the urge to download the apps. That's a small step in the right direction that I can make a better choice for me. If I'm on the apps, then I could actually delete them from my phone. Maybe not delete the account, but I could delete the apps from my phone, set healthier boundaries around my own usage with the apps, and say like, hey, from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, 2 nights a week, that's when I'm going to spend time on the apps, and I'll re-download it, get back into my account, and converse with people that, through an essentialist mindset, are the best fit for me. Another way to start small with our choices is to understand the power of no. Saying no more often welcomes and invites the things that are meant for us into our lives. For the longest time in my business, my professional life, my personal life, I thought that saying yes to a lot of opportunities were going to bring more opportunities to me. What I didn't understand is that those opportunities that I was saying yes to were actually filling up my schedule and my calendar and my life with things that were not meant for me, blocking that which was meant for me. And that's not the type of life that I want to live. If we believe in the laws of attraction, then we're actually blocking what the universe, God, our source of spirituality is sending our way. Another way to start small, especially after a breakup, is to date yourself. What does that mean? You can focus on your physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual health immediately after a breakup. This will help you make that choice to delay downloading the apps or to delay finding a new partner to replace the hurt feelings or to fill the hurt that you feel after a breakup. So again, that's physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual health is your focus immediately after a breakup. When you begin to focus on these healthy choices, you'll find yourself attracting better partners, better friendships, better jobs, better opportunities, better invitations because you've said no to those things that don't serve your physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and I'll even add in here financial health. When we say yes to so many things, oftentimes they cost money. If we're draining our bank account to find a solution or to find something that's going to fill that gap that was just left for us, that's going to actually pull us away from self-leadership, making better choices for ourselves. So that's the power of no in application. I got invited to go golfing at Evergreen Golf Course before it closes for the season a week from this coming Sunday. And it was an immediate no for me. Okay, what is it going to cost me in time? And what is it going to cost me in money? And then what is it going to cost me in the self-criticism that I will most likely show myself in the day leading up to it, the day of, and the day after? Like, oh my gosh, I spent this on that golf round. Or, oh my gosh, I gave up all this time driving to Evergreen, playing a round of golf, and then driving home. Now my Sunday is completely gone and I'm not prepared for my work week. All opportunities to take a look at our own choices, start small, use the power of no, and delay gratification or delay supplementation of our experience by downloading the apps, which will possibly distract us from healing the wounds that need to be healed after a breakup or before we enter into a new relationship, or wounds that don't have anything to do with relating with a romantic partner. They might be healing wounds of codependency with our family members. It may be healing wounds of grief that we're experiencing in the last 18 months, collectively, individually, and within partnerships. And lastly, if you want to start small with improving your choices, which will then lead to a less anxious state over time, find a community or support that can gather around you and you can lean on when you need them. A community can look like a kickball league. It can look like your favorite sport league. For years and years and years, I joined co-ed adult softball. That's before I found jiu-jitsu. It was something I did in the spring and the fall with friends to make new friends, to find a community of like-minded people who were just out for a good hour of fun once a week, and we've remained friends years after. What does support look like when we're facing anxiety in our lives? The support that I experience in my men's group is unbelievable. It is by far the best choice that I've ever made. And I made that choice immediately when shelter-in-place orders came down in 2020. If not for that community and support system around me, I don't know if I could have been as resilient as I have been with the ups and downs that the last 18 months have given us. I have 2 different men's groups that I attend. One is faith-based through church at Flatirons, and the other is through Man Talks with Connor Beaton. I get the opportunity to facilitate a weekly call. If you have any questions about what men's work looks like, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram. And what's the overall point that I'm trying to make with self-leadership? Overall, the point I'm trying to make is don't gravitate to what gives you anxiety. And through your own choices, making better choices over time, you're going to feel that anxiety begin to dissipate. And when it does show up again, you have more resilience and more tools in order to face it because you have community and support around you. Right now, in my life, dating would give me severe anxiety. Not because I'm lacking confidence, not because I don't believe that I'm good enough, smart enough, lovable enough, worthy enough of a relationship. It simply would be a distraction from the other things that are priorities in my life. It also helps me use the power of no. If I were to self-abandon what I know I need right now by accepting a date, I would understand that I'm giving up on my sovereignty and my agency to fill some void that's there for me. So recently, this past week, I'm working with a client and he says, "Oh, Dave, here's the perfect first date idea." And he's talking about, it's not the zoo. It was some other attraction here in Denver that doesn't normally do like winter events, but he's like, they're going to string up 1,000,000 lights and they're going to have like food and drinks available. And you could take a first date through the holiday season to this experience that's brand new that they're never going to experience before, that you've never done before. It'd be a lot of fun. And the feelings of anxiety that came up for me when he was just describing, "Dave, this could be a perfect first date for you." That is a telling sign for me to say, I'm not ready. I'm not available for dating right now. And if I were trying to date right now as an unavailable person, it's likely that I would be attracting another unavailable person that's only going to create that downward spiral, giving me more feelings of anxiety, having my attachment style show up, and understanding that I've given up on self-leadership, abandoned my sovereignty and agency in order to fill some void that's there. So as a conclusion of that, at the conclusion of that conversation with my client, I gave him a very deep look into what I'm experiencing at the time and what comes up for me when I'm thinking about going on a date. During our conversation, we were talking about what's appropriate to spend the holidays together. Do you meet each other's family for the first time? And we were like playing around with some boundaries that were healthy for me. And it was just bringing up a whole lot of feelings of anxiety for me, telling me that I'm not supposed to be dating right now. That could be my inner compass. That could be my connection to God speaking to me saying like, "Dave, if you're dating right now, you're not going to be getting what is meant for you in your life." So playfully at the end of the conversation with my client, I said, okay, my New Year's resolution, my goal for 2022 is to have one date between January 1st and March 1st. And he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I can totally support you on that." And it was a half joke, half truth of putting it out there for self-accountability, accountability within this community, of saying, I don't believe that it's the right fit for me to be dating until after the new year. I've got a lot of work to do over here. And in that process of doing the work, I'm preparing myself for that time. I'm preparing myself to become a better partner for myself, because I'm not going to be spending every day with somebody that I'm dating. So I need to be a good partner for myself first. And then I'm preparing myself to be a good partner when that time comes for me. Essentially, by saying no to myself today, I'm delaying the gratification of what a relationship would be like for me right now, which doesn't serve my physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and financial health at this time. Like I said earlier in the episode, if you stuck around till the end of the conversation, I was going to dig a little bit more into the breakup story. And I've been having a hard time facing and discerning what was going to be the part of the conversation that felt authentic to me, that felt like the right thing to do, and to share with my community what has been coming up for me, what is my experience in this dating process. I chose to share on social media the processing of the grief that I was going through. And one thing that came up for me in counseling, my counselor, he's like, Dave, I'm hearing you speak a lot of great emotions that you would tend to feel after a breakup, but the thing I'm not hearing you talk about is loss. What feelings of loss do you have after this relationship ended? And that was a really good question for him to ask me, that inspired a lot of thought and a lot of feeling for me. The feelings of loss that I have were buried deep underneath the grief, underneath the anger, underneath the sadness. Yes, I'm losing a friend, I'm losing a partner, I'm losing an opportunity to deepen a relationship that was going very, very well for quite some time. And up until the end, our boundaries were being upheld and very respected, and our communication was by far the best communication I've ever brought to a relationship. And I want to honor that. I want to reiterate that there's a difference between privacy and secrecy in relationships, and what I choose to share with our community through the podcast and on social media. So I'm not keeping any secrets at the time, but there are some things that are very private for me. One of my favorite lines is, live publicly, date privately. And while the details of the occurrence that caused our breakup are important, that's part of what I'm keeping private at this time. What I'm not going to keep secret from you all is that a boundary was crossed and an apology was received and heard. And then more feelings came up for me about my own emotional and physical and mental safety within the container of the relationship. And upon sharing those feelings of like, I feel scared because it's familiar, because it was familiar to this time in my life when that boundary was crossed. And I took some time, and I took the rest of that evening. I came home and I had conversations with my men's group members, one from each of the groups. They were there for me immediately. This is another reason why men's work is so important, is in a moment of, I don't know what to do, I don't know what's coming up for me, I don't know what I'm feeling in this moment, they were there for me. You know, it was pretty late at night, 10 o'clock when I was driving home, and I texted a buddy of mine and asked if he was available, and he immediately called me because he knows that that's not the norm. He's like, Dave, what can I do for you? And I pulled over my car and I sat in the car for 10 or 15 minutes and I chatted with him, because he was a part of the relationship the whole time. You know, he would hear stories from every other week when we would get together. Hey, Dave, how's Jess? And I would share the stories that are coming up for us and all the triumphs and the challenges and the truths that were showing up. And he just held space for me. You know, he never once said, this is what you should do. He empathized with my situation and he gave me the support that I was looking for. Later on, I put a message out on our message board for the other men's group. And one of my members, who's a night owl, lives on the East Coast in Canada. He's like, Dave, I'm here for you. What do you need? Do you need a phone call? And he was there for me. He just listened and he held space, and he's asking some follow-up questions. And he says, Dave, what does support look like for you right now? And that was a really important question for me to hear, because I just needed to speak. I just needed to talk. I needed my voice to be heard. and I needed to process what was coming up for me. And the evening of, I needed tears to fall. I needed a safe place to have this conversation within a safe container because I was feeling very unsafe. And from those conversations and a couple of conversations the next day with more members of my men's group, and my feelings of physical, mental, and emotional safety that I had voiced the night before were invalidated. And that's not something that I feel is a very healthy approach to relating with an intimate partner. And at that time, I knew that if I had continued to stay within the relationship, I would have been abandoning what my needs, my boundaries, and my intentions for a relationship are. And because of that, I made the best choice that was there for me to make. It didn't make it any easier, but it was the best choice for me. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen as I recap what was coming up for me in the end of my relationship about 7 or 8 weeks ago. I appreciate all the support that I've received on social media when sharing my story of grief and what's been coming up for me ever since. Thank you for holding the space for me today to label, name, and process what is still moving through me as I work my way through the most recent breakup. And this gives me an opportunity to sit with the emotions that are there and to understand what I can take ownership over in the relationship and what has come up for me since. Relationships as a whole are a tremendous mirror that are held up for us. They're a reflection for us to take a look deep inward so that we can identify what past patterns, what current patterns, and what patterns can continue to show up in the future so that we can be better equipped with tools and resiliency and love and faith and a belief that we are meant to have a close, intimate relationship in our life that serves us. So I'll leave you with that. That sums up our episode on dating with anxiety. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram. That's where I'm most frequently found, at Dave M. Glazer. I'm always happy to answer questions that may have come up for you during the listening of this episode. Until next week, this is Dave Glazer in Denver, Colorado, wishing you health and happiness wherever you're at in the world.